Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. As you can see, we're going to be talking more about Prop 1 today. Now, we have just under 2 weeks to go till the election. I'm not here to tell you how to vote, but I am here to encourage you to study this issue as closely as possible. And what we're going to be taking a closer look at today is what snake oil and Prop 1 advertisements have in common. There is a common factor. We'll get to it in just a moment.
The press club are biased all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. Happy to have you with us today, and I know that I'm beating the tar out of the Prop 1 issue, but this one is important, and I say this with the understanding that looking at the latest polling, it appears that, at least for the moment, those who are against Prop 1 are in the lead. I think the last I saw was about 45% of those surveyed said they don't support this new way of voting in Idaho. We'll talk more about what it actually consists of in a moment, but 35% say, yeah, they do strongly support it. There are a lot of people out there who are still undecided, so it's not a sure thing at any point. One thing is for sure, though, the more people know about what is actually in Prop 1, and more importantly, who is funding the advertising pushing this, it starts to make sense that, hey, maybe this really isn't being done in the interest or in the best interest of Idaho and our voters. So from the Idaho Freedom Foundation, I picked up this graphic which illustrates the amount of out-of-state money funding ads for Prop 1. Notice anything there? That red part is the out-of-state contributions, $3,200,815.98 compared to in-state contributions to the group Idahoans for Open Primaries. That seems significant, doesn't it? I mean, I've heard these scary tales of dark money coming in here to help the radicals and the extremists with the Idaho Freedom Foundation, but this kind of tells a tale of a lot of people seem to be funneling money to the Gem State with a very vested interest in somehow changing things here. And you have to wonder, okay, if it was really such a great grassroots supported effort, would they need so much out-of-state money? Now, something that makes it even more interesting is, I believe it was conservative host Dana Loesch on her program interviewed an individual by the name of Drew Matich. He is an Idaho resident. I believe he's a refugee from California. And he was telling her about how he encountered ads on podcasts that he was listening to, and oftentimes, depending on the platform on which the podcast is hosted, you'll hear streaming third-party ads. What made these ads very interesting was that they were tailored to sound like they were part of the podcast that the person was listening to. In other words, if you were listening to Dana Loesch's podcast, well, it sounded a lot like her having a conversation with somebody who was talking about how he had just found religion, and I'm going to, support this Prop 1. Kind of deceptive. And if it was a guy, you would hear it, in a guy's voice. And it was done, if you listen to the audio, they sound very much like they're just coming back to the conversation. We were talking about Prop 1 and the caller, straight from a script. Well, I too was interested in this. And then I learned that it was going to help give me back my voice, which hasn't been the case since 2011 in Idaho. And anyway, the amount of deception there was considerable. Somebody went to a lot of effort to try to fool people into thinking that, oh no, this is an issue that you and your fellow conservatives are very much on the same page with. So let's talk about some of this funding here. By the way, my hat tip to Loss. This is Nicholas Kleinworth. He's an analyst with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. In his last Fiscal Friday video presentation, he talked about who is really funding Prop 1. And it's not Idahoans. More than 60% of the money comes from out of state, and not just out of state, but far left donors. And if you want to watch that, you can go to idahofreedom.org to learn more. You can go to the YouTube channel. You can follow them on X and so forth. But this was a great expose of Prop 1's misleading grassroots claims, and also a nice discussion on how ranked choice voting is being pushed, not just in Idaho, but across the West. Let's take a quick look at some of the donors here under the side of Idaho Sunshine. So Idahoans for Open Primaries. And I know this is hard to see. The names are rather small here. The groups include Article 4, Unite America Reform Fund, Michael Calhoun, Oppenheimer Company, Roundhouse Group Incorporated, Kenny Lee Van Zelt, Ronald Greenspan. Look at the amounts, though, that are coming in here. 50,000, 500,000, 715,000, 10,000, 100,000, 715,000 again. That's a lot of money being dumped into this. Somebody has a very vested interest in trying to change the way that we vote in Idaho. And so maybe we should take a little bit closer look as to who that is and why they're so interested in exerting influence here in the Gem State. Scott Herndon, former state senator, points out that millions in out-of-state dark money is being dumped into Idaho this month to lie to voters and fool them into supporting Proposition 1. But he says, instead, tell your Idaho friends not to vote for it and against jungle primaries and ranked choice voting in Prop 1. Now, it's interesting because just yesterday I got one of these in my mailbox, and I was going to actually bring it to the video so I could hold it up and show it to you, but unfortunately I cleaned up after my dogs yesterday, and let's just say that what I cleaned up for my dogs landed on top of that flyer in my trash, and I didn't really feel like digging it out, but I feel like it's in good company, what with the amount of deceptive claims that are being made. So let's delve a little bit more into some of the deception. Oh, before I go there, though, let me point out two more rather prominent names that have stepped up here, and I don't mean to denigrate these guys. I think they're making the right choice, but I'm just going to say, these are not exactly what one would term extremist, radical, dark money Republicans. These guys are pretty mainstream as far as the Republicans go. Representative Mike Simpson and Lieutenant Governor Scott Betke both have come out announcing their opposition to Prop 1. And they're some of the final members of Idaho's top elected officials that oppose the ranked choice voting initiative, which is interesting because the press still doesn't really like to talk about this. They want to give the impression that it's something that's really widely supported. Oh, and one other recommendation. If you get the chance, jump onto YouTube and check out Unholy Alliance, the left's Gem State power grab. This is about a 45-minute long documentary. It is super informative. You may want to watch it a couple of times. This was put together by Eastern Idaho radio host Neil Larson, and it's a very solid look at the effort by Reclaim Idaho and Idahoans for Open Primaries to attempt to pass ranked choice voting in Idaho. I think this is important because the flyer that showed up in my mailbox was all sunshine and it's open primaries. Look, doesn't that sound good? Open primaries. But that's not what that is. If it was open primaries, it would be a matter of there would still be parties having their primary elections, and that would be that. But this actually does away with party elections. And all people, all parties can take part in those open or jungle primaries, I guess is the more appropriate term. But the real fun starts when you finally get the top four and send them to what's called ranked choice voting or the instant runoff in the general election. This is where it really gets prone to abuse and prone to manipulation. And it's not an improvement in any way from Idaho's voting system. So I'm going to lean a little bit on Jonathan Rawls. Maybe some of you have read some of his books. The guy's quite an author, but he talks about Idaho Prop 1, good old days or revolution. He makes a pretty strong case. It's not just a return to the good old days with open primaries. It's deceptively being labeled and advertised as something else. He says this November, Idaho will vote on Proposition 1, the Open Primaries Act. And he puts that in quotes deliberately. Don't be deceived. He says it's a revolutionary political scheme being billed as a return to the good old days. Prop 1 would fundamentally restructure how Idaho tests its county, or rather elects its county, state, and federal representatives, and replace our time-tested electoral system with a novel ranked choice voting system. Now, here's some of the history behind where we've come from and where we are right now. Idaho historically has had open party primaries. So each voter received a single ballot. The first question was which party's primary they wanted to vote in. It's not a matter of you can't vote in this. It's a matter of you had to choose. Which one do I want to vote in? And the system was relatively clear and simple. This still led to significant crossover voting in which progressive, liberal, and moderate voters opted to vote in the GOP primary instead of the Democratic primary. Now, it makes sense. Since Idaho is such a conservative state, the expectation was that they could have more influence over the election outcome by influencing the selection of the Republican nominee rather than choosing a Democratic nominee who was more likely to lose. People would vote for rhinos or vote for Republicans just because even if they seemed a little bit more of a rhino. He describes it like this. This had the long-term effect of compromising conservative politics in Idaho as moderate Republicans appealed to and served liberal interests rather than the Republican platform or voters. Now, in the general election, conservative voters would see the Republican nominee as the best available option, even if they were known to be a rhino. This led to the growth of a corrupt, progressive-leaning Republican Party in the state where, despite having a Republican governor and supermajorities in the legislature, conservative governance never really happened. Here's a chart to illustrate what that looks like. The perception is on the left. Oh, look at all those registered Republicans. Wow, the House and the Senate. Yeah, the Republicans are dominating. But the reality is, when you look at how they vote, look at how many voted against the GOP platform versus how many voted in line with the GOP platform. Voting like a Republican, you're actually in the minority. And this is something, a trend that has been slowly but surely starting to reverse, especially as we've seen an influx of people from less free states migrating to Idaho, knowing that they're going to find a greater measure of freedom here. They're serious about keeping their freedom. Now, he says this changed in 2011. With the move to close primaries, political parties were able to limit participation to only voters who were affiliated with the party. So in Idaho, that meant that only Republican-affiliated voters or unaffiliated voters who choose to affiliate as Republicans on or before Election Day are eligible to vote in the party primary. That's the system we have right now. And the effects of this change have been tremendous. By excluding crossover voters, in other words, ones who are trying to monkey wrench the system, the primaries have regained their original role of helping the party choose its best candidate without outside interference. The closed primaries have led to an upheaval in the rhino establishment, though, because we've seen a lot of them shown the door. And we've seen the formation of a serious, motivated Freedom Caucus that was formerly excluded by the moderate establishment. So Mr. Rawls says the last 13 years have seen tremendous wins for liberty in Idaho, including legislation for property and income tax cuts, constitutional concealed carry, protecting the life of the unborn, and against the advancement of the progressive agenda in public institutions. So this is just some more food for thought, something for you to think about as you consider your choice a week from Tuesday in casting your vote regarding Prop 1. Again, I'm not here to tell you how to vote, but I'm hopefully showing you there are some very serious reasons to give great thought before you cast that vote and make sure you know what you're voting for. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press Club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark